Hello, my name is Hugo Prévost. Welcome to SVGA, your PC retro gaming podcast. With me today, as always, is Robert Hills. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Hugo. How are you today?
I'm fine, and you?
Getting by.
Before we begin, I'd like to point out that it's not only our 10th episode on for the show, but also the 100th podcast episode released on pf.ca. So congratulations, everyone.
Thank you. Mostly congratulations to you, but yeah.
Well, it's a way to view things, of course. Thank you to everyone who worked on these shows, be it Entretien Journalistique, Rembobinage, or this one, so SVGA. Thank you to the guests also, and a very special thank you to you, our public. So today we tackle what could be one of the I've written down an intro as I do every time we record an episode. I wrote one of the most known PC game of the early 90s. I think it's fair to call it that, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're doing Myst this week,
Yes.
which if you've read the episode title, you probably know by now. But yeah, I'd say Myst is probably one of the most well-known games in the 90s, just because it has an appeal beyond just like a shooter or a platformer. It's much different.
And we'll be able to, of course, to discuss because I think there's the nostalgia factor once again, and there's this the test of reality. Maybe we could call it like that, because of course we both played the game, and I have to admit, first of all, that I couldn't finish it. I was just too frustrated, and not only did I need a walkthrough to get nearly to the end, but I went to a point near the end of the game when I was just like, okay, no, that I'm done. It's too much. It's too maybe clunky. We'll get to this. For a move on, it's a game Myst, like you said, from 1993. So this
is it 93? Oh my god!
Yeah, 93 on Mac. One of the few games that came out on Mac first at the time.
Oh, okay.
And 1994 on PC, so the 1 year later, or maybe a few months later, at least on PC. Developed and published by Cyan, which studio that still exists today, mostly to sell Myst copies, but. But still, they're still out there. I mean, that's you usually don't see many game studios from that period still alive today.
No,
still producing, still at least selling stuff.
They've either gone out of business or been swallowed up by someone much bigger.
Something like EA, or they've been bought by EA.
Name one just out of the air.
Yeah. So yeah, Myst 1993. A mix of adventure and point-and-click game. Maybe that's the right way to describe
it. It's an interesting one because it's theoretically three-dimensional, even though it's kind of you don't move around freely in the world. You kind of point and click and you move from space to space, but in that way it kind of works within the limited technology, I guess, that was available. Like, I don't think a world that frankly still looks kind of good.
Yes.
Not great, but it's actually like visually appealing and, very familiar, and they basically render it and I imagine just essentially freeze frame it, and then you get a bunch of these things, but you get this world that kind of, it doesn't look terrible even, almost 20 years later, which is interesting. But there's a lot of point and click to it, but it's also an adventure where you're just kind of dropped into this world with very little idea what's going on or what you're doing.
Exactly. And I think we both played the Masterpiece edition of the game.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, as Cyan says, the studio says on its webpage, because they sell, I guess, three editions now. So you have the VR one if you have an Oculus Rift,
which I do not.
Oculus, which I don't either. But I mean, we both have glasses, so it's one strike against us if you want to play some VR. So yeah, there's a VR version. There's this Masterpiece edition which we played, which is the as they said, the most it's exactly as you remember it from back in '93. So it's basically the same game, just ported to modern systems. And there's this Real Myst Coma Masterpiece Edition. Or is it Coma? Anyway, Real Myst Masterpiece Edition, which has, I think, is the another sector era bonus, some kind of bonus content, which we didn't get in this playthrough. But still, we played it as it was in the early '90s. What I wanted to talk about first is maybe I could try to talk about the story a bit, talk about what's happening exactly, because as you said it, we get on this. I mean, I think everyone who's listening right now, I mean, I hope so, remembers or at least knows about this island, this aerial shot of this island, which was on the box of the game, with a spaceship, with a sunk ship, with a bunch of buildings and some trees. And so basically there's this island called Myst, where you end up at the beginning of the game and you don't know anything. I mean, there's this intro sequence where someone talks about books, someone talks about moving from place to place, but it's basically this. You don't really know what's happening. You get there on this pier, and there's the ocean sound in your ears, and you're already, I think it was part of the appeal of the game at the time, is that it's not as they did with other adventure game of that era, for example, King's Quest, where you have this long intro sequence where usually you get to know who you play as, and there's just all these characters talking, explaining the plot, and now you're just there, and that's it.
Yeah, and you're dropped in this kind of world that is essentially original, like it exists nowhere but in this particular universe, and I think everyone can really picture that first, you drop in and you're on that pier and you can see the little switches ahead of you.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first played it, just walking around and I don't know that I ever really got off the original island playing myself, because it was, 93, I was 6-7 years old. So it, a bit, not quite, able to understand what is going on or why.
Yeah, and so basically what you have to do is, explore the island first. Yeah. And then you discover that there's all these, what they call ages, which are basically worlds, distinct worlds, that you can you can visit by using books. And there's this person who has, I guess his name is Artus, which is and he has the power from his father to create these worlds by writing books.
Yeah, or at least to visit them somehow. It's not entirely clear how the book writing is either about traveling or creating. I think it's traveling mostly, but it's all very vague, and they kind of do that purposefully, I think, which sort of works, sort of doesn't, but.
And so eventually rather quickly you pick up a note, and it says it's addressed to Catherine, who is the wife of Artus, and it's from Artus, and it says, "Catherine, my love, you have to help me if you remember this and that, and if you want to travel from place to place, remember this and that, and if I left a message for you someplace, and it's you have to remember it's the number of switches from the islands that," and really quickly understand that you have to take down notes first of all. You have to note stuff down, and you have to. It's a series of puzzles. There's a few mazes there. Robert is.
I've got a whole notebook here of just random things, dates, times, numbers, some shapes.
I do too. I have this notebook, and I remember when I got the game, my parents gave me the game. 25 years ago, maybe a few years after the game came out, and it came with this whole notebook at the time where you still had some big boxes for PC games, and it had this whole notebook with the cover with the Myst inscription, and you could once again take down notes, and you need to in this game. I mean, you can use your phone today. It's 2021. I mean, there's technology around to do that, but at the time, and I discovered that it's really more interesting to take down notes by hand than to write stuff down on a keyboard or just type it down on your phone. It helps put you in the mood for the game, let's say.
Yeah, and it's one of those ones that really rewards you for. Well, not just rewards you, but like you have to just explore everywhere and try clicking things, and you actually have to go through the guy's bookshelf and start reading these other books that have clues and in some cases like really necessary instructions to how to get through things.
And so to just cover not the entirety of the story, but just to cover the basics of the story, you discover in this library that there's 2 books apart from all the others, one blue, one red, and there's a page for each book beside each book. And when you put the page in the corresponding book, you can see this small window to someone, and it's not very clear what they want you to do. And they say basically you have to get me out of this book, collect the necessary pages, be it them red or blue, and help me to get out.
Yeah.
And you'll have to go through basically 4 worlds to collect these pages and eventually get down to the end of the game, and stuff happens. We won't spoil the story.
Yeah, we won't spoil it completely, but you're trying to save them from the books by putting all the necessary pages back.
I wanted to talk about the ambience of the game, because there's not a lot of music. There's some music, and it's mostly, but Myst is mostly sounds, and I think it's very telling about the impact of the game. I mean, I remember I've talked about the sound of the ocean at the beginning of the game, and I remember this. Every time you go from a world to another, there's this rumbling sound, some kind of teleportation sound or something like that, and it's stuck in my brain. And it's been 28 years now, 27 maybe on PC, and it's still stuck in my brain. I can still remember exactly what's the sound like. And I think it's, like I said, it's very telling about the impact of the ambience of the game.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was actually talking to my wife about it, and because it's a game that she really enjoys as well, and she really mentioned the sounds and how sort of at one point I was playing it beside her because I played this one on my Mac because I just wanted to go in other rooms and just do other things while I was doing it, and she could remember that whoosh of the ocean and the kind of lapping up against the pier, and it's a really like the click of the switches, and there's buttons have sounds, and there's a whole world that really involves using sounds to solve puzzles, which I had to go back into my office and like close the door and really listen. But it's a game that really takes advantage of and requires you to really think with your ears, and it draws you in that way, in that it's not just a world that looks interesting, but it sounds interesting.
And I think it's it's maybe a bit of a paradox, but if the developers had all the technology that they needed to do the perfect game at the time, I think it wouldn't have sound like this. I mean, there would have been more music, there would have been more stuff maybe. And I think that the fact that they're limited by, like I said, technology at the time and the size of, I mean, it came on a CD, and we both watched a video from Ars Technica. They do a bunch of interviews with old PC game developers, that the people are still around, of course, and they talk with someone that developed Myst. And the idea of the video was that they had so much stuff that they were unable really to fit it all on one disc, and they had to. It was a constraint at the time. 1993 CDs were starting to come around, but there were still games on diskettes, and you really couldn't ship Myst with 750 diskettes to copy on the computer. No. And so, this video is really interesting. I'll put the link after the episode on Pieuvre. And they talk about what they had to compress everything down. They had to cut some stuff. And you see in the game exactly what they cut, basically. I mean, first of all, the game, you talked about it, is basically PowerPoint, the game, and which, because it's not really a 3D world. It's a series of still images, and sometimes you have some moving stuff, but you can see, especially on the 4K screen like I have, I don't know if you saw it, but you can see the pixels where this video screen appears on the image, and you see the limitations of what they had to work with at the time. So it's really interesting, and it's this kind of games where older is better, maybe.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the problems with it that it can be very frustrating to navigate. Like one of the one when you go through the spaceship, it's basically the sound world, and you have to navigate around this island, but it's very difficult to get your bearings. And there's another one where it's a treetop maze, and it's you click and you get lost and you get frustrated, and it's very like that limitation really makes it difficult to enjoy at points, like very frustrating. Like, okay, screw this, I'm going to the walkthrough, just tell me like left, right, left, kind of thing. But, and I mean, for the purposes of this, I kind of wanted to get through it rather than, it was just, okay, like I've hit a wall, what do I do next? Because I want to see more of this. Yeah. But those same limitations make it kind of interesting in that you have to think about how you do things. Like there's one part where you need to basically figure out that like, oh, that thing will float, and you deal with, pumping water out of one room and into another, and things kind of work themselves out once you figure out the ways in which like, oh, this is still a real world where like things are buoyant. It happens off screen essentially, which is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one way to tell a story that usually you say show, don't tell, but sometimes you really just can't show stuff. And it's the fact that, and I think it's one of the ways that Myst distinguished himself from other adventure games of the era is that, once again, if you go back to King's Quest, for example, you have this whole interface on the screen that you can bring up. You have an inventory, you have an option. I mean, you do have an options menu in Myst, but this, sorry. And in other games, it's always, and you see yourself on the screen. On the other games, it's really a 2D plane where it's basically one frame, and you can exit out of the frame, but it's basically one frame at a time. In Myst, you're there. There's no inventory. There's no health bar. There's no points. There's nothing, and you're really there in the world, even if it's, once again, one frame at a time because of the limitations of the era. But you are in the world, and I think that's one of the points where it really stuck out. Stuck apart from all the other games of the time. You talked about mazes and puzzles, and I want to build on that because this sound age where you take up basically have to take a spaceship there or whatever it is, and when you're done with the sound puzzle, because you basically have to remember 5 different sounds from all these points on the island, and then you get into a submarine. I think something like a submarine.
It's a submarine or some kind of like techno subway cart thing.
and this is where the game nearly lost me, because up until that point I was exploring. I was thinking to myself, oh, I won't use a walkthrough because I mean, I'm 24 years old. I can handle Myst. I mean, it's not the artist. I mean, it's not that easy as of a game, but it's not that hardest game either. It's not the Witness, or what's the there was a game from a few years back where it's only puzzles and you only have to draw puzzles on the screen. And I looked at a trailer and I was thinking, okay, after 5 minutes I would have been just rage quit. But yeah, in Myst, so I mean, basically, if I was able to do it as a child, I should be able to do it as an adult. And then so you get to this point where there's this railway system underground, and I was okay. I was trying to take down some notes to say, okay, you have basically 8 directions where you can go. There's a bunch of places where you cannot go. So obviously you have to choose another place. But okay, and so on and so on. And then I went to a point where, okay, I have to backtrack. I have to, and every part of this system looks like all of the other parts of the system. And since it's a really, really small screen, because they're limited with their technology, I have to read the walkthrough basically to discover that, oh, you have to listen to the sound.
Yeah.
Every time you change place in the system, and the sounds are different from one time to the next. And I was thinking, okay, this is an excellent example of where the developer said, okay, I know how this should work, and in my head it's clear, but you did not take the time to see if it was clear for everyone else.
Yeah. Well, like, and the walkthrough I read, because I used it for this part, and I was just like, no, I don't. If I do this myself, I am going to quit, and I'm never going to want to see this game again. So I used it, but the walkthrough that I described it was there were basically 3 ways to do this maze. There's one where you go through it and you just map it out and like you draw it or whatever, and you just figure out how to get to the end. Or it told you what, because there's a sound for each compass direction. So it'll go like bing for north and bong for east, but then for northeast, it's bing bong. And then, which is something that I don't know I ever would have figured out unless I mapped the whole thing and just happened to just like a light went off. But even then, I don't think that would happen. And there's nothing to suggest, at least that I saw, and I may not have read the book well enough about the space age, because I just took pictures of all the diagrams and like, because there was a lot of extra story that I just, in the end, like, I'm not sure I care, but maybe I should have. But it was like, that part was it. And then, because you kind of want to go back and you want to go get the other page, but then you realize to exit, you got to do the whole maze again. So it's like, walk through.
Wow. Yeah. And that's the thing with the pages, because I already saw many. I mean, I think we both played already a few years ago. Maybe, like you said, you never got off the main island, but I know how it ended. I already knew how the game ended. So I already knew what to do and what not to do. And once again, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's no real incentive to bring the pages back home if you want to call it home, but to bring the pages back on the main island, because the people stuck in the book says, oh, you have to collect all these pages, and but like you said, you cannot go and take both pages at once.
That's the one part where the game really could have used an inventory.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a bit dumb. And you could fold them and put them in your back pockets. I don't know. It just carry them with you. It's not.
You have 2 hands.
Blue. You have 2 hands, and it's not like you have 10 weapons to carry and 15 potions, and it's just
surely the coat has 2 pockets.
Yeah, exactly. And so and this maze. Oh god, this maze. There's no pattern. I mean, I took down. I wrote down the what you have to do, the directions you have to go through, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, I think 11, something like 10 or 11 directions, and it's just too much. It's too many. and it's no, like I said, there's no pattern. It's not okay. I went north 3 times. I have to go west 3 times, and no, it's like, oh, you have to switch directions sometimes, but not always. And there's no, like you said, there's no indication that you have to go this way or that way. It's all the same stuff every time. So
I'd be very curious to if any listener played this game originally and figured out the sound pattern on their own. I'd be really interested to like how you made that connection. Like, did you have to map it all the way, or was it something that just occurred to you that like, oh, bing bong means like this?
Yeah, because you can brute force most of the puzzle. It's going to be very long.
Yeah,
but you can brute force them. It's just, it's boring. It gets boring at a point. What about the impact of the game?
I think. Well, I think the big thing is so both, like my wife and I, this is a game we both played, and I think in the 90s, like I'm a little younger than she is, and we have very different interests generally towards, especially around that time. She was playing Nintendo and stuff, and I never had a Nintendo, for example. So, but the fact is, we both had played this game and were very aware of it. So I think it has a very kind of, cross-cultural kind of appeal to, if you were aware of video games in any sort of sense, that this is one that you knew of.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, my partner, we sat down, I think it's 6 years ago now. We just started going out together, and she asked if we could play Myst together, and we bought the game on GOG, tried to play it for about an hour or two, and just never picked it up again. Not because we were bored, but because we just didn't take the time. But yeah, I remember at that time in 1993, 94, maybe 95 even. I think it was, like I said, the fact that you were really, really into the world instead of seeing the world through, because I remember games at the time with, once again, huge health bars with or buttons or direction, and we weren't really that far from the era where you had all these listings of action words that you could use to try to navigate into
lock,
the world.
Open drawer, like on and on and on.
And so going from that to a place where you don't know what to do, but there's no arrow pointings anywhere. There's no timer going down. There's no health bar. It's really, really interesting to see that, once again, with the limitations of the time, they were able to create this fantastic world where everything seems possible, because you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know when you click on a book, and it's of course an excellent metaphor for reading in general. But when you open a book, you never know where you're going to end up, and it's I think as a avid reader, I don't know. I mean, I'm seeing right now the background of your office, and it's full of books, and looks like it's about to fall off. I don't know.
No, they're just everything. Don't worry about
it. Everything's sturdy, but yeah. So it's this universe where everything seems, like I said, seems possible. Everything seems attainable just by opening up a book. I think it's a really, really good usage of full motion video. Well, full motion. It's let's say in a tiny screen on your.
They made very limited use of it, which is why they did it well, because they didn't. That's how it works. Is you don't overuse it.
And we won't mention that game whose title starts with P.
We almost made it through a whole episode. Look, I was going to compliment you on what a great metaphor that it's, you open a book and there's all the possibilities, you don't know where they're taking you, and then you had to bring up the other things. So I have no compliments for you.
Oh god! But yeah, it's a really good usage of full motion video. It's and it's not there's not a too much exposition, maybe not enough even, but still it's enough to be able to navigate the world and to solve the puzzles and to understand what you have to do. Sometimes it's a bit, you stumble on stuff by chance. There's when you have to go to the space age, you have to power up the spaceship first. And there's this thing where there's this power station where if you go over the limit, you trip a breaker. And you have to understand that there's a place on the island where you can reset the breaker. And it's one of these things where it's not explained.
Yeah, I won't mention how much time I spent trying to remember that there was 2 breakers and not just one. That was an irritating 20 minutes.
There's 2?
There's 2. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's one right next to it, and then there's one like halfway there. It's the one that halfway there.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah. But yeah, so the fact that sometimes it's not really well explained, and I think it's where maybe the faults of the game lie.
Yeah, but at the same time, if it didn't have that stuff, I don't know if the game would be as charming. So it's really like, it's a very fine line that they had to walk, and sometimes they did it well, sometimes it was a little more like, but I think that limitation is both like, it's the thing that really elevates it and also occasionally brings it down. Like there's parts where it doesn't quite work and they need just a little, like just a hint of something somewhere. But for most of it, I think that's what gives it kind of like its specialness.
Yeah, I agree. So would you recommend Myst?
Yes. And the one thing I would say is give yourself some time to do it. And like, unfortunately I had a pretty busy couple of weeks and I wasn't really able to give this kind of game the full sort of thing. So I had to lean on the walkthrough a bit more than I would have liked, or was a little more willing to, because I was just like, oh, this is frustrating, like onwards. But it's one of those things that if you really put that time into it, the things even the stuff that I didn't try and do with the walkthrough, like very satisfying to just like, oh yeah, this is how it works. And like, oh, I figured that out. And I think I would recommend it, yes, and just go into it with the kind of mindset that, you know, I'm going to try this thing and see how far and how much I can get before I turn to the walkthrough, because they're really easy to find. It like you're going to know they're out there. It's very tempting.
And I will also recommend Myst, as you said, it's with the idea in mind that it sometimes can be quite frustrating if you don't know where you're going, what you're doing. Usually there's some indications of what you have to do, at least some cryptic ones, but you can still understand them. Otherwise, I mean, it's well made, well thought of. It's I haven't played the other versions of the game. I saw some endings with the VR version of the game, and it just looks just too realistic.
Huh, interesting.
And I think it can both be frustrating to have to navigate with the point and click system. And I remember, I think it's in Riven, the sequel, where you can move about a little bit more freely. And as they put out more sequels, you were able. I haven't played the Exile, the third one, or the fourth or fifth or sixth one, or how many there is.
I think there's 5, but there might be
5.
6.
Yeah. But yeah, I imagine that eventually you're able to navigate freely in complete 3D world. But now it's 2D, it's Proto 3D, but it's still well done, well made.
It still looks very good, and it's got a really interesting style to it that, you know, is, you can kind of see it's like, it's a lot like watching Reboot. It's that same kind of era of graphics and textures and stuff, but it's really, it's pleasant. There's a lot of marble too, which was big at the time, I guess, in terms of texture, because you could make it smooth, but just anyways. It's interesting. And I think one thing I think we should do is we'll come back to Ribbon later on. We had talked about beforehand, and I think that's one that I want to give that time to really try and get through, because I think from what we both understand, it is easier to get around in, and so some of those frustrations of the first game just aren't really there, or not there in the same,
Well, let's hope so, because I mean, it's always a challenge when we do these kinds of episodes. I mean, it's the same thing for modern games. We're both fans of the Battlefield series, and you recently told me that Battlefield 1 was on sale on Steam, and I bought it, and it's a beautiful game. I really like the campaign, even if everyone seems to have machine guns for a reason, even if it's in the First World War, but still. But yeah, so I told myself, I'm going to play a bit of multiplayer, and jump right in, and I got killed in 5 seconds. And I remembered, it's the Battlefield series. I'm going to die. I won't be able to kill anyone. I'm going to get sniped from across the map from a dude on a camel or whatever it is.
They're horses, but...
Yeah, but still, I mean, there's this GIF from Battlefield 1 where there's someone riding a horse, and there's another person from the same team with a flamethrower, and then you have a mobile flamethrower on the horse, and it's and it's that kind of game. So it's always what I wanted to say was there's always this kind of frustrations, not always, but I mean, even one of my favorite games, which is Factorio, I remember being so frustrated because I wanted to do stuff to build my factory in a way that I wasn't able to do. I was trying to understand how the system works, right. And it's always a pain when you don't really understand how the system works, and you have to rely on walkthroughs, on let's plays. Same stuff for Hearts of Iron 4. That's one of the best slash work
I have watched of all. Hours of videos. Okay, like how do I do this?
Yeah, and I mean I have more than 215 hours in this game, and
I'm not going to say how many hours I have, but might have crossed into triple digits anyway. So that's not important.
Yeah, I still think I am a mediocre player at best. So it's anyway. So yeah, if you want to give it a go to Myst, it's usually under $10. We'll put a link if you want to buy it on the.
It works really well. I played it on Mac. It also works really well on PC. Like it's ports of this era turn out to work really well a lot of the time, and this one works great. Just remember to save your game. I screwed something up.
Exactly. But yeah, I used the GOG version, and maybe the only problem I had was it was so not zoomed in, but since it was on a 4K screen,
right?
The language written in books you have to read in the library was a bit blurry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I played at 1080p or whatever and didn't have those issues. So
okay, maybe
probably just yeah.
I'm trying to be too fancy here.
Yeah, your monitor is just too good. Tone it down.
Yeah, it's too hot for the class. But yeah, so thank you, Robert, for being with me for this 10th episode of the show. Thank you to everyone, of course, who is listening right now. Don't forget to subscribe. We now have a Facebook page. So if you want to check us out on Facebook, because we are in with the times, we do now have a Facebook page, and we also on Twitter. So if you do a search, I think it's SVGA_podcast on Twitter.
No underscore, SVGA podcast.
Oh, sorry. But yeah, so SVGA podcast on Twitter, SVGA podcast also on Facebook. So as I said, I think last time, every Tuesday we have a mini review of a game of not necessarily from the 90s or early 2000s, but still a mini review. And every Thursday we have our sales thread. So all the games that we think are interesting right now and are available for a few bucks right now. So you can
some of them aren't sales, some of them are just like that seems like a decent price for the game, but yeah.
So thank you again, Robert, and
always a pleasure. Yeah, until next time. That was fun.
Bye-bye.